Hi, friends. Welcome to the Full and Thriving podcast. I'm your host, Meg McPhail, and if you're here, it means you're ready for some aha moments that will inspire you to create a more vibrant, authentic life that's full of joyful moments, deeper connection, inner peace, and courageous action towards your dreams. Let's get started.
Today's guest is Stephanie McPhail. Stephanie is a toxic relationship recovery expert with lived experience of breaking free and healing from an abusive relationship. Stephanie is also the author of the book Being Loved Shouldn't Hurt. She's a fellow podcast host and speaker. And today we talk about the warning signs of toxic relationships, the common traps that people fall into to stay stuck, how to break free from these relationships, and how to transform into a more joyful, fulfilled version of yourself after you've finally left. This episode is packed with information about following your gut and creating a better life for yourself. I know you are going to love it. And a quick trigger warning here for this episode. The first part of this episode involves Stephanie sharing pieces of her story, which includes physical and emotional abuse, violence, and mention of suicide. If you're not in the proper headspace to absorb this sort of story today, that is totally okay. I suggest you go and listen to another different episode of Full and Thriving that might be more helpful for you today, or wait until another time when you feel more ready to absorb this content. And with that, I hope you enjoy this riveting episode of Full and Thriving. Hello, Stephanie. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I am so grateful to have you here. It is such a treat to be talking about recognizing and overcoming toxic relationships today. I cannot wait to dive into it with you. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. And I'm excited to be able to share this because I think this is something that's not really talked about as much as it could be. And there's a lot more people suffering than we're really aware of.
I completely believe that. I feel like there are so many people out there who have these glossy, shiny relationships on the outside. And then deep down inside, it's actually not as fulfilling or as healthy as it looks like.
Yeah. There's a lot of people that are pretending because they're embarrassed, because they're ashamed, because they feel guilty, because they feel like they have to. They feel like they're not successful if they don't make it work. And so there's all these outside pressures and then internal pressures keeping us feeling stuck in these relationships when the reality is that we don't have to stay stuck. We can create something better and different for ourselves.
That is so relatable because I know I've had my own relationships in the past where I'm even afraid to say anything negative about it because I don't want people to start disliking my partner. So it's like this weird teeter-totter of like shame and expressing yourself and navigating like love at the same time. So anyway, we'll dive into it today. Again, this is such an important topic that needs to be talked about, and I can't wait to hear from you. So I guess to begin, could you please tell me more about your personal and professional background?
Sure. So I used to be really good at choosing really shitty partners and trying really hard to make it work. So if you're listening and you're like, that's exactly where I'm at, definitely sit in and take some notes because I think you're going to get a lot of really great value here. And again, it's way more common than I realized after I started sharing my story. But my first long-term boyfriend was a great guy. It was nice until it wasn't. Once it was about 2.5 years in and his father passed away, everything went downhill. And he started to become verbally abusive and then at times physically abusive, although the abuse was more towards physical threats and like punching holes in the walls and accusing me of cheating and stuff like that too. But it became just very unsafe and very dangerous. But I stayed for 5.5 more years. So I just didn't know when to end it. And then when it finally did, I still felt really guilty and really embarrassed about all of it. Even though I knew going into that relationship, that was not going to be my forever. I still felt really bad letting it go. And things got really bad for him afterwards. And I still, because it got so bad, felt really bad that I had let him go when he needed me. And so without realizing it, some of that shame and guilt of ending that relationship was following me, and I hadn't done my own work. So when I met my next long-term relationship, which was my first husband, I had all this emotions that were still there that I hadn't worked through. I felt like I was getting older, like I had never yet found the person I was looking for. And I definitely felt like I was settling. And I even knew it at the time, even though I might not have wanted to admit it. But I wanted to settle down. I wanted to get married. I wanted to have children. I wanted all of those things. And even though there were red flags, I ignored it, thinking things will get better after we get married, or maybe there's something wrong with me. And then again, all those other things that were coming up. But it ended up that on our wedding day, after we got married at a castle and everything was gorgeous and family had come from everywhere, he filled up the bathtub with water. And when I went to go put my foot in it, some water spilled out onto the marble floor. And he started yelling and cursing at me because I didn't care about anything. He was the one who overfilled the tub. And I said, sweetheart, don't let a good day go bad. And that was the wrong thing to say. So he chased me around the honeymoon suite for the next 5 hours, threatening to kill me, telling me that marrying me was the worst thing that he had ever done. He threw his wedding band. And again, I'm totally naked. I have nowhere to go. I'm embarrassed. I'm scared. I'm ashamed, all of that. And instead of running out to get help, I just kept staying in there, hoping that he'll finally stop, until he finally threw me on our wedding bed and started strangling me until I thought I was going to die. And luckily he stopped and he apologized. And I curled up in a ball and thought, oh my gosh, this man that I just married almost killed me. What am I going to do? Am I going to tell my minister that just married us that this is what happened? Like in my mind, I was like, tell him to throw out all the documentation that we got married. Then I'm thinking about all my family that had come for this and all of this other stuff. And he knew how to manipulate that, promised it would never happen again, made all sorts of excuses as to why, and then said, and if it does ever happen again, I promise to leave without a problem. Well, that's never the case. And of course, if he had gotten better, then I wouldn't be sitting here. Things got worse. I stayed for 5 years trying to make it work. And again, there was more physical violence. He would spit on me. He would trash the house. He would leave me places, curse me out. So the emotional abuse, along with some of the physical stuff, moved into there. And we tried therapy, tried all that kind of stuff. But someone who doesn't want to take responsibility for their behavior, you can try therapy all day long. And I kept trying to prove to him that things could get better if he just did the work, but he didn't want to because everything was my fault. So I finally left and then thought I could figure it out on my own because I'm smart and independent. But I kept finding myself in the same place. And when I was in the emergency room with a sprained ankle and all these bad things had gone wrong, all of a sudden my ex-husband walks in, the doctor walks in, both of them are sitting there. The doctor says, hey, you've got a really bad sprained ankle. I start crying at the same time and hear this voice that says, you need to be your own knight in shining armor. You need to stop waiting for someone to come and save you, and you need to save yourself. And in that moment, after years and years of everything going wrong and going through a depression and everything that could possibly happen was happening, I said, whatever I've done hasn't worked, and I don't ever want to do that again. Who do I need and what do I need to do in order to change it? And it was in that moment that the whole trajectory of my life changed. And I'm now, obviously divorced, married to my best friend, have 2 beautiful children, and we get to help other people heal and transform their lives as well so that they don't have to stay stuck in these toxic relationships and they can really step into their power.
Wow, what a story. I'm so, sorry that all of that happened to you. And I'm also grateful that you are strong enough and in a place where you're able to talk about this and actually use those experiences to help other people kind of overcome this on their own. My question for you is, you had this moment at the doctor's where you're crying. Did you tell the doctor? I know they do those screenings about personal safety. In the doctor, was that how you broke free, or how did you end the relationship going from there?
Well, we had already been divorced at that point. I don't think we were officially divorced then, but I had already started the process. I was already out of the house, but he was still trying to get back into my life. And, I had actually, when I decided to get a divorce, it was pretty much Cinco de Mayo. I always remember. I had decided, I think February, but Cinco de Mayo was when I said, I cannot and will not do this anymore. And, I started that whole process by moving out to go stay at a friend's house and sleep on her pull-out couch because I knew that we had been having that dance for so long of let's try to make it work. I would throw him out. I would let him back in. I would call the police. I would have, an order of protection. And then, he would beg me to take him back and that he was going to change, things were going to get better. We had done that for so long that when I finally said enough is enough, I knew that he wouldn't take that as a real thing. And so I had to be the one who left. Now, and he told me also that if I ever left him, he would kill my dogs, he would destroy my house, he would do everything to basically destroy my life. But I got to such a point where I was like, as much as I love my pets and I would do anything for them, I can't put myself here and stay here for that. I have to make myself safe. I have to do whatever it is. And of course, later on, he would be like, well, I would never hurt your pets. I'm an animal lover. I just said that because I was mad. I mean, but that's the kind of level of manipulation where he would say and do things when he was mad that were not quote unquote normal for him. So that became normal, is that he would say these things and you never knew. And at one point we got a divorce, or we started the process, and he told me that he was suicidal and he had gotten a shotgun. And I was nervous because I had told actually my lawyers, like, I'm worried about him having a shotgun for my safety when he loses his temper. But luckily, when he told me that he was suicidal, I was able to call the police, have him picked up, and I was able to call the hospital and say, hey, I'm a suicide counselor and my ex-husband is threatening suicide. He does have a shotgun and access to it. And kind of a blessing in disguise was that the police took away his shotgun. So that was very helpful to me. And also he did admit that he was seriously thinking of ending his life. So it saved him, but it also saved me from any kind of fear and the possibility of him using the shotgun on me. Again, you don't know what's possible when someone is like that caged animal where like literally anything is possible.
Wow. What a story. I'm so grateful that that shotgun was confiscated. You found your window of opportunity to move in with a friend and find that distance that you needed to get out of there. That is like really, really good to know that you were able to get to that place. I'm curious, just as, you know, someone who's been in unhealthy relationships, what are some of the warning signs that people might have to look out for when they are in an unhealthy relationship? Warning signs that perhaps it's time to get out, or maybe they should leave. And I think there are many examples of toxic relationships that are physically and emotionally abusive. And then there are also those relationships that are a little less intense, but also very distressing. Like maybe there's no physical threats or abuse happening, but it's still unhealthy. So I'm curious about the warning signs in a relationship where the abuse isn't so obvious.
He strangled me. I never had bruises. I never had broken bones, anything. And my way of coping was, well, he's not doing any of those physical things. But in reality, actually now it's a felony to strangle someone. Back then it wasn't. But in my mind, it was, he's not doing these other harms to me. I'm not someone who's in an abusive relationship. So we're able to lie to ourselves in that way. So it's really important to be aware of that. I think the most important thing to always remember is that if you feel unsafe, if you feel drained, overwhelmed, unsupported, not respected, you can't be your best self, you can't share what you need, you can't communicate, you can't be and act as if you're with your best friend, all of those are signs it's not healthy. And we can lie to ourselves all day long, but most of us see those red flags way in advance and we ignore them. We have a feeling inside of us that this doesn't feel right. But because like for me, where it was like, I'm getting older, I want to settle down, I haven't found anybody, all those things that we tell ourselves makes us settle, even though we see those red flags, or we see things that are familiar to us from childhood. And some of those things that are familiar to childhood are not healthy either. So if we're looking for something that's home, but home is stressful and causes us anxiety, that's probably not what we should be going for. But if we haven't shifted that perspective of what love is, we automatically go for that type of relationship. So when we look at abuse, physical abuse is like stage 4 cancer. Physical abuse of any kind is the next stage is death after, stage 4 cancer. So if you're like strangulation, he could have killed me the first time he strangled me. And when someone's beating you up, they can kill you when they're doing those things. So if there is any kind of physical abuse, that's get out right away, right now. Then there's the things underneath. And so like punching holes in the walls, breaking things in the house, that's still up there because that's all that is escalating. So that, that might be stage 3. Then you have like the controlling of your friends, your family, who you're spending time with, whether or not you get a job, the money, all of those things, that could be a stage 3 also. Then you have the verbal assaults. I mean, some of the things that kind of started out for me with my ex-husband is that we would be out in public and he would tell me things like, hey, you're too opinionated. Nobody actually wants to hear what you have to say. Or like, these people don't actually like you. They're just trying to be polite because they're friends with me. And, and so things like that where you're like, wait, this person loves me. And of course, they're going to tell me to try to protect me. And again, that's all the manipulation. They're not trying to be hurtful. They're trying to be helpful. And I'm the one who's obviously being terrible because my husband or my significant other is telling me I'm too much. Let me dull myself. Let me quiet myself. Let me not share more of who I am. Maybe if I change my friends, maybe if I don't talk as much to this family member that annoys them, maybe all of those things will make it so that he's not so angry or he's less upset. He doesn't lose his temper, And so anytime where you feel like you have to dull yourself, you can't be fully your version of you. He fell in love with me because I was a strong, independent woman and then did everything he could to kind of knock all those things down. When you're in a relationship, you should be bringing out the best in each other and be inspired by each other. But these kinds of toxic relationships, there's this attraction. And a lot of the times it's one person is a giver and the other person is a taker. So if you're someone that you give without boundaries and you give until you're empty, if you don't heal that, you're going to keep attracting people that are takers, which are the narcissists, the sociopaths, the psychopaths. They're trying to take advantage of someone who is giving and kind and thoughtful and all those things. Those are all beautiful qualities and well put together for someone who also is a giver and wants to be supportive and all of those things. But if we have no boundaries, we're going to end up being with the same type of person. So a long-winded answer of saying like, we have to really heal the areas of ourselves to see very clearly when things are not going well. And it's going to be a little bit different for you and for me because my personality, there's certain things that I want in a partner where somebody else might not want in a partner. So you have to figure out what that is for you. If you're with someone, it doesn't feel good. You got to look at that. And if you're feeling like this is not going to ever bring out the best in me, then why should you continue staying in that relationship? Why not leave? Give both of you an opportunity to find someone who's a better fit for you.
I feel like that's such an interesting place to be, right? Like you've fallen in love with someone, you have this romance that you're like really excited about, and then you start getting these signals and this internal feeling that they're not right for you. And so what I'm hearing is you're living with this internal conflict that just continues to get stronger and stronger. Could you describe more of what it's like to be in that place to people who might be in a relationship where they're convincing themselves, or maybe in this place where they're consistently hoping that something's going to change?
Well, I worked with women who have been in these relationships for 20, 30, 40 years. And they've told themselves over and over again, well, I fell in love with this person, or I'm staying for the kids, or, things are going to get better, or if I change this thing about me. You have to understand that for a lot of us, because we haven't healed ourselves and we're looking to fix and help other people, we want to see the good in them. And that's a beautiful thing for your career, for other things, like for children, for other people. When it comes to your partner, you have to see them for who they really are and decide how you're going to interact with that person. So if you know who they really are, you're not there to fix and change them. You're there to be supportive of who they are, for them to be supportive of you, for them to be them, just like you should be you. You can't sit there and be like, well, you're great, but if you need to change the XYZ about you, no one's going to want to be in that. And now what's interesting in that too is that when we are codependents, which we are codependent if we are in these toxic relationships, staying even though our gut is telling us that we shouldn't, we're trying to fix and help them. That's also pretty controlling, not meanly, because we see what's possible. We see what's good in them, but the other person, it's not their idea. That's not what they want to do. And I think this is the biggest thing that any of us can think about. And I don't care how long you've been in a relationship. This actually is happening to someone that I know right now. She's in this relationship. She keeps arguing. She's frustrated. She's overwhelmed. She just doesn't even know what else to say to him to make him understand what he needs to do to change. And I keep saying, but this is who he is. You're trying to make him into what you want him to be, but he is not. So again, you have to decide, and they've done couple counseling, they've done their own therapy, they've done all of those things. If they're showing you who they are, you can't repaint them into something else. So either you learn how to deal with them the way they are, or you decide, I'm not going to continue doing this and I'm going to leave so that we can both be able to go find a better fit for ourselves. This is not, I'm not good enough or I'm not being chosen or any of those insecurities that we have. This is allowing ourselves the freedom to find and create happiness for ourselves and also allow the other person to create happiness. You've done the communication, you've talked about it, you've tried to explain, whatever the issues are. There hasn't been a change. You've seen the way they are. You get to make a decision on how you want to live. And an indecision is a decision. Do you want to wait 10, 20, 30 years for them to be the person that you fell in love with? And was that person even real? Or was it someone pretending a certain way in order for you to fall in love with them and get the prize of you in that relationship with them? So let's not live in the past. Let's live now and make decisions that are best for us.
It's a really interesting concept because you're trying to change them for the better. You're trying to get them to go to therapy. You're trying to get them to understand all these psychological concepts, whatever. I know last time you and I talked, you mentioned that one of the most common patterns people fall into is this continuous researching cycle. Can you share what you're talking about there? Because I totally can relate to that.
Yeah. So what I find when I work with clients that are still in it, and so there's these very common things that happen. They're in this relationship and they start recognizing that something isn't right. And when we get into there, then after we recognize wait, something isn't right. Is it me? Is it them? What's going on? We get into this really intensive research. And so we read all the books. We learn about codependency. We learn about narcissism. We learn about sociopath, borderline personality disorder, childhood traumas. We get all this information and now we're overloaded with all this information. And now we're like, oh, okay, now maybe I can teach this to them and they'll finally understand what they're doing wrong. And maybe we can make this relationship work. And then we get into the addiction phase. What do I need to change about me? What can I change about them? How can I force them to understand? And we become addicted to making them see. We might print out articles. We'll force them to go to therapy if they'll even come with us. But we get addicted and so if they could just do this thing, our relationship will be okay. All of those years or that time that we spent together will not be for nothing. It will be for something because I will have won. I will have gotten them to learn it and I will have fixed them. And it feels very romantic. It's very romanticized, that addiction phase in our brains, but it's also very codependent and it's very enabling because it enables them to keep saying, this is actually your fault. They don't have to take responsibility for themselves or their behavior because you keep trying to push them to change. And now they can be like, well, it's you. And you can be like, you're the reason why I'm not happy. You're the reason. So it's this addiction. And when you're addicted, you're looking for any type of attention that you possibly can get. So even when they're arguing with you and you're trying to prove to them what's wrong, even that feels good because we're getting attention. We're getting them to see things. Well, we have this big argument. Maybe now he'll understand or she'll understand better. But it's not how it works. It's not how healing works. And so after that, the addiction phase, we have to get to acceptance. This is who they are and what's going on. And again, what I said before, then we have to say, what am I going to do about this? And really where change happens is then getting the accountability and support to actually make the changes because our thinking has been so obsessive, it's keeping us stuck. It's not getting us out of where we are.
Interesting. I didn't even think about asking you about love addiction today, but that's just striking a chord with me in a way. Can you define what love addiction is for people who might not be so sure?
When I use addiction, I'm talking typically just the addiction of a toxic relationship. That kind of addiction is you're looking for the fun part. You're looking for the romantic part, the beginning parts of the butterflies and the excitement. That would be love addiction. Of course, sex addiction, you're looking to just, for the orgasm, for the anticipation and all that kind of stuff. But when I'm talking about for toxic relationship addiction, there's this thing that happens and there's that typical cycle of what happens in these toxic relationships where, things start to go bad. The event happens, something bad happens. And then there's the reframe, the honeymoon time again, where you start reconnecting and feeling good until everything starts getting a little crazy again. And then the big event happens and then the honeymoon period happens again. That's where the addiction comes in. So the person that's looking for that, like, okay, something really bad happens. That means this is the part where we have makeup sex. This is the part where things like get better again because we'd have fights. There would be something would happen. Sometimes after the big fight, the big argument, he wouldn't talk to me for a period of time. And then it would be like, okay, fine. Like, well, it's been 2 weeks. We're not going to talk about a solution. We're just going to pretend like that didn't happen. And now we're really connected again and things are really good. And you're like, so you're looking forward to that time. And then all of a sudden you can feel things start to get uncomfortable again. Like, uh-oh, I know there's going to be a fight. I know something's going to happen. It finally does. And then you just start the cycle all over again. An addict gets used to that cycle. So after they discard us or we're like, the relationship's over. I'm not doing this anymore. Now we're checking our phones. Are they calling me? This is the part where they text me. This is the part where I call and beg for them to come back. We become addicted to that cycle because we're looking for, it's like, I always give the example. It's like pledging a sorority. The harder it is to get into a fraternity or sorority, the more people want to get into it. And it's ridiculous, but this is this part of us where it's like, I worked really hard to make this relationship work. All of this work is going to be for something, but it's just because we're addicted to try to make it work without realizing that it's not going to work. None of this is healthy. None of this is going to be good long term. And really what's best for us is to go through the withdrawals. Like, let's not go back to that honeymoon period so that we can start the cycle all over again. Let's leave it, go through the withdrawals so that we can do something else.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you articulated that there's a cycle that you keep kind of getting sucked back into, because I know that's kind of exactly what it feels like. And I'd say that's the glaring red flag, is if you find yourself getting sucked back into cycles periodically, it's a sign that you got to break that cycle. It's time to actually leave. And, my next question really is, how do you shift into the mindset of, I'm actually leaving, the decision is made? Like, how do you help people get to that point? And like, what tips do you have for people who are thinking about leaving or have decided and just don't know what to do?
What I did was when I started to realize that cycle, because at first we don't see it. We're just in survival mode. So it's just like, okay, here we are. This is the fighting. Okay, the fighting's over. Okay, now going to that, things are going to get better. We don't realize it's a cycle. We're just living it. Writing things down can be really helpful. And, for me, like my birthday's in December. So it's at the end of the year. And I just remember getting to a point I was like, I'm 33. Is this the best it's going to get? This is my life. I'm married to this person. Then I was like, oh my God, I just turned 34. Like the relationship is no better. In fact, it's getting worse. Things are actually escalating. This is my life. And then I remember asking myself, am I going to be on my deathbed? Still asking myself, is this the best it's going to get? And then, is he going to kill me? Is something bad going to happen to me because I'm staying in here? And I started to really have those questions. But I think for me was starting to recognize, wow, this is what happens. This is what happens every single time. This is a special occasion that he is ruined yet again. And here I am sad and isolated and alone and embarrassed and all these different things. I started to recognize it. But a good thing is writing it down. I wasn't always super comfortable telling friends because I didn't want anyone else to know what I was dealing with. I could handle it. I could be there to help everybody else, but I could handle it. So writing things down, if you have someone that you're confident in sharing with, share with those people. I did have one or two friends that I did share some things with, and they would point out like, this is what happened last time. Remember last time you said it was going to change? And I needed that. And I needed also for those one or two people to say, hey, you're invited, but because he brings drama, he's not invited. We always love you. You're okay. He's not okay. And it was good to hear that because like the way he would tell it, it was all my fault. I was the one causing every problem. So I needed to hear from friends like, I don't know, he's manipulating you. So that kind of stuff. So if you have friends, if you can write things down, look at, different occasions that you've not felt good in, if those are things that have happened. When people come to me, they really start to say, I know things are bad and I know that I shouldn't continue. I just don't know what to do. One of the things that we do is help people go through those withdrawals. So sometimes it's like, okay, what can we do? It's like, again, it's the addiction. So what can we do to avoid making contact? So, okay, reach out to us. Let's hop on a phone call, go through the modules. We come from a holistic perspective. So did you exercise? Did you get enough sleep? Did you meditate? Did you find joy? Did you do things that you enjoyed doing? What are the things that you did? Did you make a phone call to a friend to share like, hey, I'm feeling weak right now. I might make a phone call that I don't want to make. So to be able to actually go through the withdrawal of taking the time away from them, like of getting like physically away from them, getting off the phone calls with them, but you have to remove yourself from the situation in order to go through the withdrawals because your brain wants to feel better. And what's the addict brain feel better doing? Getting the drug of choice. So your brain lies to you like, hey, you know what would feel really good? Reach out to them, call them, tell them you're apologizing so you can get that little bit of attention that you're looking for and start the cycle all over again. So you need really someone to hold you to your decision on leaving and ending it because your brain will do all sorts of lies to you. But you have to come to that decision. And it's hard when you're on the other side, you're a friend or a family member and you're watching someone that you love struggling. It's really hard to watch it. But the more you say to them, your significant other is terrible, you shouldn't be with them, it almost makes things worse. So we have to be supportive. We can say things like what I said before. We're like, wow, I can only imagine how stressful this is for you. Like, I'm seeing this happen and I don't know what to do to help you, to make you feel better. I can see how overwhelmed, how stressed out you are, how stuck you are. What can I do to help? And let them know that you're there for them without really trying to point fingers and say how bad the other person is, but just let them know that you're supportive and helpful. The person's going to have to come to it though on their own, which again is not always easy.
Come to the conclusion that the person they're with is not a good person or the right person for them.
Yep.
That is probably one of the most important pieces. I know, like in my unhealthy relationship with people on the podcast have heard briefly about, it was one of those things where like I had multiple therapists throughout that period of time. And there were therapists who were like, oh, I give this 6 months, you're going to leave, blah, blah, blah. And like, it made me cling to the relationship so much more. I remember having a therapist tell me, I give this 6 months. And I stayed for another 2.5 years. Right. And then it wasn't until I found my current therapist who always had a respect towards the part of me that was still there and still caring for this person. And I think that was the key.
Yes, that's really important because there were times where, I would go to my own therapist and they would be like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. And I remember one time very specifically where I had gotten him to go to couple counseling and the couple counselor asked him to wait outside. And the therapist was like, I am fearful for your safety. But based on what I've seen, this is scary. This is really scary. And I remember being like, that's nothing compared to what I normally see. Like, you think that's scary? And it was almost like, I don't want to say like a badge of honor, but I was like, what's wrong with this woman? That isn't even half as bad as what I've seen. But then leaving that appointment, then my ex yelled at me the whole car ride home because it was my fault that I'd gotten the therapist on my side and that I was manipulating it and she hated him and none of it was real and he wasn't going to go back. And it was this whole manipulating thing. So I kept staying, even though like the therapist was like, this is very scary. And I knew she was right. It was almost like, that's not even that bad. Like she's making this bigger than what it is. She was right. It was scary and she wasn't making it bigger. It was real. But I think you're the same thing. For me, I always say to my clients, we're going to support you no matter where you're at. If you decide like, hey, I want to try to make this relationship work, then we're going to support you in that decision and then give you tools to make the right decision for yourself. Because if you get healthy in yourself, you automatically won't want to stay in that relationship. If you start to get your self-esteem back and realize like, I deserve more, you're not going to go back to there. But if I say your significant other is a jerk and they're terrible and whatever, you're going to be like, oh, how dare you say such terrible things about them? I'm going to try to make it work. I'm going to prove to you that I'm different and I'm going to make this relationship work. It does the opposite effect. So instead, I'm going to support you. I'm going to be there for you. There's no judgment. And in doing that, we can help people guide them to the right decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's so interesting how you have that reverse impact or, without realizing it, like that therapist might have that impact, like where maybe you're not quite ready to hear it. And you have to double down on trying to make it better, or you just find a new therapist or something like that.
That's what I did. I think I went through like 3 or 4 different therapists. Like, I'm going to make this relationship work. I'm not going to be one of those divorced people. Like it was some terrible thing to be divorced.
Yeah, I think that's another red flag. You've cycled through a ton of therapists. I remember going through a second couples therapist and like the first couples therapist, you're like, oh, I'm really trying. Like, we are keeping it level headed and like we're working through it. The second couples therapist, I was like raging angry at every single session. Like, I had given up on trying and it was more of an event session. So like I felt the evolution there, but it's like, yeah, that's an interesting piece. I actually wanted to shift towards that more uplifting piece, which is once you're gone, right? Once you've had the freedom or the courage to break free, how do you do the work? You mentioned inner work to prevent yourself from getting stuck again. Like you even said, after your first relationship, you didn't do the work. You had some residual feelings coming through and it all carried into the really toxic marriage. How do people make sure that doesn't happen to them?
Okay, this is my favorite. So helping people get out is so important, obviously. But my favorite thing to do is like, okay, now that we're out, let's never freaking do that again. Like to me, like that's the important thing. And where a lot of people get that wrong is they jump right into another relationship or they don't get into another relationship. Like maybe they'll do some therapy, but they don't do the right work and then end up sometimes 10 years, 15 years later in the same type of relationship because they haven't healed the parts of themselves that were attracted to those toxic people to begin with. And as much as we're like, I'm not attracted to those people, if we keep ending up with those types of people, we are subconsciously. It's what we know. So, when we help clients break through that part, we say, when you've ended that relationship, now I don't want to talk about dating yet. We'll get there. Like I promise you, we'll get to the dating part if that's what you want. I've had some people that were like, I just want to start dating again. I want to be single. And we ask them to take a break. They start focusing on themselves. And then they get really excited about being single. They're like, I didn't know it could be like this. This is a whole beautiful, it's a whole new world. So, I think it's important to get to that point though, no matter whether you start dating or not, you have to get to a place where you're really comfortable in yourself without needing a relationship where you are really filling up your own cup. So what we take clients through is a 6-step process. And the first one is identify where you kept repeating patterns. Identify where this is coming from. Is it your childhood? Is it your upbringing? Is it past relationships? Is it your own insecurity? Is there shadow work that has to get done? Is there childhood wounds? What is it in your background that is allowing you to stay with these toxic people trying to make it work and not knowing when to stop? Again, I think professional women, we're like pit bulls where we grab on and we don't know when to let go. It's great for work, right? I mean, that's what makes you successful. But when it comes to these toxic relationships, it's not so good. You have to know when to let go. So you have to really look at and figure out where those patterns are so that we can stop. Once we know the pattern, we can break the pattern. So that's one of the really important pieces. The next one is you want to make sure you're building a team. So most of us have been to therapy. We love when clients have started with therapy. After therapy should be a coach. And the difference between the two is a therapist is more focused on backwards. A coach is more focused on getting you to a goal. So if the goal is healing, maybe in the future, dating, whatever that is, creating your best life. I have a lot of my clients where they come to me and they're like, my goal is to date. They start doing the work and like, my goal is to start my own business. My goal is to travel the world. My goal is to, go back to school, whatever those things are, those goals start to change. But you want to start building that team. You've had your therapist, you have your coach, you have your people that are on your team that are there to support and inspire you. Because a lot of us don't realize the amount of toxic people we actually have in our lives. It's normally not just that romantic relationship. It's normally also at work or family or friends. So we've got to build a team of people that are like-minded, that are supportive, that are inspiring, that literally just are there to help us be our best version of ourselves. And a lot of us lose that along the way or never had it. The next one is to discover who we are. So again, increase our self-esteem, discover our passion, our purpose. We were not put here to suffer and to just deal with these toxic people. So we've got to reconnect to our passion and purpose and really step into who that person is, which is such a fun thing to do. And we forget how adventurous and exciting life should be in a positive way. We created excitement, and I use the term kind of loosely, but the excitement was the drama of the toxicity. What if instead we can have excitement by where we're traveling next or what new adventure we're going on? What if that could be where the excitement happens? So the discover part is really important. Understanding ourselves. What are the limiting beliefs? What are the belief systems that have kept us repeating these patterns? What are the thoughts about relationships that we have? What are the thoughts about what's possible for us? The thoughts about ourselves? What do we tell ourselves? I'm not good enough. It's not possible. We can't create something different. So really understanding ourselves, pursuing our gut instincts, pursuing our ability to speak up for ourselves, to communicate, that it's okay to share our wants and needs with somebody. And that's something, again, as people pleasers, we tend to lose those things along the way, is the healthy boundaries, the healthy communication, being able to trust that intuition that most of us have shushed for way too long. And then goes to the next one of the goal setting that I mentioned earlier, which is just, okay, now what? Now that we're not focused on this toxic person and the toxic relationship anymore, what do we get to focus on? And again, so for some people, it's like, okay, now I want to start dating. Okay. I call that educational dating, starting to learn what you're looking for in a relationship, all that. Some people, the goal setting now is like, okay, now I'm going to start that career. I'm going to travel. I'm going to, I had one woman, she created a clothing line for children, and like, she was such a smart woman, and wasn't using her brain for good stuff. It was all for the relationship. And all of a sudden she's like, I have all this energy. I've got 4 kids. I've always wanted to do this, but I haven't had the energy to do it. Now I do. Bam, she's, creating this clothing line. So being able to set those new goals and have bigger things for our lives, having that, we protect our energy way better. So we will no longer allow those toxic people in, which really makes us toxic person proof, because we'll see it and we'll do something about it as opposed to seeing it and ignoring it.
Mm-hmm. I think those 6 steps are super helpful. I love that part about connecting to your intuition, because I feel like the entire time you're stuck in a toxic relationship, you're just ignoring the intuition, right? Or you're steamrolling it. You don't even hear it sometimes, but when you do hear it, you just try to gaslight yourself out of it or something. So I love that something you do is help people trust that again and listen to that again. One of the most exciting things about ending relationships is the space it opens for you to explore and focus attention on who you really are as a solo human, right? And what you're meant to do and what your passions are. I love that one of your recent clients just created a clothing line. So cool.
It's cool. And again, like, people that are like, they could have never imagined that. Like, I had a woman that she was 53 and she's like, I want to go back to school. I always wanted to be a social worker. I thought I was too old. Why not do it? I'm going to get older anyway. Let's just go back to school, be a social worker. And she only took a few classes at a time. But again, 2 or 3 years was going to go by anyway. Might as well do something you enjoy in those 3 years. Why not? We talk ourselves out of so much. Start doing the things that you love doing. When you have that calling, there's a reason for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so great. And then the educational dating piece too, super fun to just help those individuals like gather information about what's the actual best person I can be with, and not letting those red flags be ignored again.
One of my things I remind people all the time is, it's not our job to prove to them how worthy we are. We have to already know that we are worthy and decide, is that other person a good fit for me? Because again, sometimes people are great people. And especially when you've been in a toxic relationship, it's easy to go into settling mode because they're a great guy, they're a great girl, they seem really nice. They have some qualities, but are they the best fit for us? And I'm not saying, some people are like, oh, people get too picky, but this is a life partner. This is someone that's going to be with you through thick and thin and everything that life has for you. So, starting to learn what you deserve and creating that life that's amazing to you, and then saying, who's going to add to my life? I'm deciding, I am the creator of my life. Who is adding to my life as opposed to who is taking away from my life? Because that's what a lot of us dealt with too, is that we're minimizing ourselves. We're not shining our light fully. We're dimming ourselves for somebody else to make them happy and feel good. And, none of those things will be the best for us when you're looking at like living in purpose. So having some I live such a wonderful life by myself that I'm not willing to dull my shine in order to find somebody else. If somebody else comes into my life, they are going to be amazing also in their own right, so that we're adding to each other instead of anyone's taking away from anybody.
Mm-hmm. I love that. So one final question. This is just something that came to me right now. When you were going through the dating process after your abusive relationship, what were the qualities you were looking for that you had learned were something you needed to prioritize?
Well, in my educational dating, I started really creating a list I was 37 by the time I was done with a lot of the work and the divorce and time going by and all that kind of stuff. I started my divorce process, I was 34. So I had some time in between. But I remember thinking to myself, like, I would like to have children. If I don't, I don't. But if I'm going to get into another relationship, I want to be with someone who's open to having children. And I want them not to already have children, which a lot of people are like, you're 37 right now. Like, what guy are you going to find that doesn't already have children somewhere? Well, that's on my list. And, that might change, but that's something that I would like. And then, I remember as I was dating, I really, really I was drawn to musicians. I was like, okay, I want someone who can play the guitar or sing something musical. And then I wanted someone who wanted to be an entrepreneur, who had that entrepreneurial spirit. I even had I want someone who's 6'3". I'm 5'9". I wanted to be able to wear heels and still have someone taller. Like some of those things that seem silly. I wanted certain types of music they like to listen to. I wanted for them to want adventures. I wanted them, there's some of the things that seem kind of small and some of the things that were way bigger, the same values, the same morals, the same interests. I met my now husband on a dating app, and there was a picture, his dating profile picture was him holding a guitar. And I was like, okay. And then I remember opening it up and he was 6'3". And I was like, oh my gosh, that's literally what I'm looking for. And then as we started talking, he was very spiritual and very well-spoken and communicative. And when I went to his apartment for the first time, he had all the same self-help books on his library shelf as I did. And I was like, swoon, wow. I love this. And, because he had done work, he had done some of the, so all that stuff. And I was like, check. And he's very family oriented and all of those things that were important to me. So I gave him the chance to see who he was. But that was all a process in figuring out what I wanted in a relationship. And I didn't settle. I found what I was looking for, and he didn't have kids, and he wanted them. So we have 2 beautiful children now.
Well, I am so happy to hear that. That is such a little fun side note that we got to go down together. But this has been so great, Stephanie. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. I know that our listeners have learned so much. And if they want to continue to learn from you, how can they reach out to you? What can they do to just kind of get more exposure to your work?
Sure. Well, the best thing to do is go to beinglovedshouldn'thurt.com/links. That's actually the name of my book, Being Loved Shouldn't Hurt. But if you go to beinglovedshouldn'thurt.com links, you'll get access to my free private Facebook group, my podcast, Toxic Love Transformation. There's also a free download that you can get to really help you start the process of healing, which we talked about, the identifying where you're at, building a team. That's going to start you through that process. And then, of course, if you wanted to work with me or set an appointment, you can use that link also to do that as well. But take advantage of all those things. I think the biggest thing, if you can understand this as you listen to this story and this conversation, I am no different than any of you. I'm not a guru. I'm not special. There's nothing about me that makes it so that I'm able to heal and you're not. The reason why I couldn't heal before is because I didn't know how to do it. That's going to be the same thing for you. If you're looking to create something different, but you don't have the tools, you're not going to be able to do it. This is why we go to school, to learn different things that we don't have knowledge about. Get the help, get the free resources that I'm offering. If it's not me, find somebody else, but get the support in order to create what you want, because the world needs the beautiful gift that's inside of you that only you can give. So you owe it to yourself and the rest of the world to really step into that. Get the help you need so that you can create the life that you're excited to wake up to every day.
Wow. Thank you so much, Stephanie. That is a beautiful way to end our show today. I love that advice. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
For those of you who might be in a violent or abusive relationship and need support and help, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE. Or you can visit the website thehotline.org for more resources and information. All right, that concludes this week's episode of the Full and Thriving podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode of the show. When you have a moment, please head on over to Instagram and follow my recovery coaching account at Meg_McCabe to stay up to date on everything I'm doing in recovery land. And if you're feeling extra inspired, please send me a direct message to let me know how this podcast has impacted your life. I'd love to hear your feedback.
Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next week.